Good afternoon, everyone. On Facebook, I'm Paul Ryan here with Martha McSally. It's a great to be with you here today. There are a couple of issues we want to talk about. First, I want to mention just how hard we're working here in the House of Representatives among the House Republican Conference to advocate for our Better Way agenda. This is an agenda that we're using and taking to the country to solve the country's big problems. I want to introduce to you Martha McSally. Martha McSally represents Arizona's 2nd District. She serves on the Armed Services and Homeland Security Committee, but there's something really special about Martha McSally. She served for 26 years in the military. She is the first woman in nation's history to be in combat in a fighter jet and to command a fighter squadron. So Martha is a trailblazer, and she's also taking on a very special issue, which I want her to talk about. And she's done some very important work about this, about women in the workforce. And so, Martha, if you don't mind, just
Sure.
give us a story about what you're working on right now.
Well, thanks, Speaker Ryan. I really appreciate the opportunity to join you today on your Facebook Live session. Look, I've been fighting for equal opportunity for women and girls my whole life. I've personally experienced some of the barriers that we've had over the years. I got to the Air Force Academy, and it was actually against the law for women to be fighter pilots. And I actually didn't want to be a pilot at the time, but that just made me mad.
Yeah.
And so I decided that's what I wanted to do. And I was in the 9th class of women at the academies. And so I've, personally experienced some of the challenges and barriers we've had over time. We've bust through some of those ceilings. We've mostly removed some of the structural barriers. And we've come a long way. But we still have women and girls in our communities that we represent that are struggling. We've got women in poverty that are more likely to be in poverty than men. Women are still primarily going to be responsible as caregivers of children. Culturally, they're more likely to be single parents. 40% of households rely on a woman as the main breadwinner for them to take care of the household and their children. Women are more likely to be in poverty in their senior years. And so there's some real challenges. Again, we've come a long way over the last decades, but I meet a lot of tired women out there that are trying to meet their full potential in the workforce, but they're still trying to meet all sorts of other responsibilities. And so often what we see and hear is we've got the Democrats who come up with solutions saying they're trying to help women. They talk about the gender gap, which I'll get into in a second, the pay gap. But really their solutions are more about hurting businesses and helping trial lawyers and not helping women. And often on our side, we sometimes pull out charts and graphs and say, look, maybe there's not a real challenge or a problem here. And so I've really motivated some men and women in our conference, again, from really all over the country, deeply care about this issue, and we have kicked off a working group on women in the workforce in the 21st century. We're having our first hearing this afternoon, and our intent is to be a platform, number one, to validate and identify some of the real challenges and barriers that are still existing for girls and women. Not everything is going to take an act of Congress to fix, and we don't think the federal government should be involved in many of these things, perhaps. And we don't want to predetermine the outcome of this. But we first want to have the conversation, get into the space, validate, listen, identify what solutions may be there to address some of these barriers and challenges, see if any of them are related to federal legislation, and if they are, we can promise we're going to be moving them forward. But if they're not, we at least part of the conversation, the platform, is to have a voice for these women and see what we can do to have them meet their full potential for all of their lifetime.
Is there a way because when you and I spoke about creating this working group, which we're very excited about, is there a way that people who are listening on Facebook can see the work you're doing? Where can they go to have input and provide feedback? And to say, maybe watch the streaming of the hearing? Oh,
absolutely. So again, the hearing is this afternoon at 1:15. I'm not sure if C-SPAN is going to be covering it, but McSally.house.gov is our website. We have information on there. You got to click on, I think it's called Women Working Group, but you can identify kind of where we are and the progress. Also, what I did after we kicked off this working group in July, I spent our time in the district on listening tours, listening sessions, and the other members of the working group are doing the same thing. And I met with individuals that are leading women poverty initiatives, or women business owners and CEOs, or others that are part of networks that are, just able to talk about some of these issues, or, academic individuals. So there's really an important element of this is listening. Not everybody has the same experience. Where you stand depends upon where you sit. And then oftentimes people have different ideas and initiatives for solutions. And so that's what the members of Congress on this working group are going to be doing. This is a multi-month potentially multi-year effort if we need it to be, because we have got to break down any remaining barriers so that we can have women fulfilling their full potential and achieving their dreams and allowing them to also provide for their families.
So for those of you watching on Facebook, this is how we try to tackle problems here in the House Republican Conference. If you take a look at our Better Way agenda, it is the result of years of work where we see a problem, we research the problem, we get ideas from people around the country, and then we offer solutions. The first plank of our 6-plank plan are better ways of fighting poverty, of getting people from welfare to work. We spent years working on this issue throughout many of our committees, going out into the country, visiting with poverty fighters in America and poor communities, getting ideas, learning about the problems, and then looking at what government was doing to hurt or help, and then offering a very comprehensive poverty reduction plan as our solution. So this is the way we like to tackle problems. Identify that there's a challenge and a problem that needs to be addressed, then go and solicit ideas and hear people's stories and perspectives, and then take our principles, apply them to those problems, and then offer good solutions. So I just want to salute you for taking this issue on, taking the initiative of forming the working group, because this is how we think government should work, where we see a problem, we look for solutions, and then we apply our principles and offer a better way.
Yeah, I look forward to continuing with the discussion and being that platform. One of our witnesses at the hearing today is T. Van Hook. She's from Tucson, Arizona, and she's the CEO of Habitat for Humanity. And she's going to be able to provide that perspective as someone who has been in the space of trying to help people in poverty. Specifically, though, we're focusing on women in poverty and the impact that has on them and the next generations. And all this lines up very much with the initiatives that we have in the poverty programs, poverty elements of the Better Way. So again, we're honing in on women because we know that there's some unique challenges that they're dealing with in the workforce.
Let's go to some questions, and I think you should provide the answers.
Oh, sure. Okay.
All right,
so Michael asks, how do you foresee government enabling businesses to create useful and productive jobs, especially in light of recent damaging federal regulations? This is one, Michael, as I was out and about in my district listening, again, since I've been in Congress, but specifically since we kicked off this working group, the impact of the damaging regulations that are coming out of the administration, it seems like they're rushing to get more and more before they leave office, is actually what we're hearing is could even more disproportionately negatively impact women. As an example, the overtime regulation. As I was listening to small business owners and women in the workforce in my community, this overtime regulation is actually putting salaried workers back on the clock.
That's right.
And one of the things that we found that is a driving force of what we call the pay gap, which there's different ways to measure it, but side by side, all full-time jobs, 35 hours and more throughout the whole year, women are generally making about 81 cents on the dollar of men. This is not side by side, same job. This is not discrimination and and bias by itself. But as you take a deep dive into that, from 81 to about 95, some of the dynamics are women going into lower-paying career fields. Women, as they get into being primary caregivers of their children, and then as their parents, they're looking for more flexibility in the workforce. And so if you're in a situation where you have an inflexible job, then you're not able to have that flexibility. Right. And so what the Obama administration is doing is actually bringing us back to a 1950s, 1960s mindset for some of these women, that right now the employer has been able to provide them some flexibility so they can still work, then they're still able to meet those other roles in their lives, and this is actually going to hurt them more than men. And so we've got to take a hard look at these regulations and specifically the disproportionate impact on women.
And we have specific agendas in here about how to overhaul the regulatory system itself. We also think that these rules and regulations that Martha was just talking about, here's the ugly part of this. She and I don't even vote on these things. You've got unelected bureaucrats over at the Department of Labor putting out a new regulation which could take a person off of a salary job and put him back on the clock, as she described. It could take away the advancement for thousands and thousands of workers in this economy, and we in Congress don't even vote on it. So one of the things that we're proposing in our Better Way agenda is all these rules and regulations that have the full force of law, they have to come back to Congress. So our elected representatives are the ones who actually have final say-so as to whether or not these go into effect or not. I'll give one more point, Michael. We're bringing a bill to the floor called the Midnight Rule Bill, because at the end of administrations, and we're particularly worried about it with the Obama administration, they try to get, at the last minute, big regulations out the door, almost giving them sort of a third term. And so we are preventing that with the legislation that we're passing here. Democrats tried to do this when President Bush was about to leave office. And so we're quoting the Democrats who are saying no president at the end of his or her term, his term should ever do this. So we're using the Democrats' own complaints to bring this bill to the floor so the Obama administration doesn't try to rush out a bunch of regulations at the last minute.
All right, so the next question comes from Mike. I won't do his last name here, but what should the next president do to destroy ISIS? Okay, well, we're switching topics here, but I happen to know a little bit about how to go after terrorists after 26 years in the military. We've been watching this jihadist Islamic extremist terrorism threat grow over the last years and in the time that I served in the military. But over the last 8 years, we have seen it now morph and metastasize into something that's far more dangerous than I've ever seen in my lifetime. And what we had was ISIS declared a caliphate in Iraq and Syria. This administration walked away from all the after blood and treasure that was shed in Iraq in order to provide some level of stability there, creating this vacuum so that they now had territory. And in those early days, there were so many missed opportunities to go after them militarily while they were in the open with conventional forces before they embedded down into communities in strongholds like Mosul and other places. And then this administration didn't take them seriously at all. And when they started to sort of slow roll their military action, they were making pinprick, anemic strikes against very limited targets, averaging about 6 a day in Syria. I mean, it was a joke. For someone who knows a little bit about air power, this was no way to destroy and defeat them where they are. Because the territory allowed them not just to train fighters, we had 38,000 or more that we know of that have traveled from 120 different countries to join the fight and actually get training, but then they actually had their own oil production, their own embezzling of antiquities, so that they could continue to fuel the fight, so they can send these jihadists out to Europe, to America, and their online presence in a way that is radicalizing people like we've never seen before online. We've got about 1,000 investigations in all 50 states going on of American citizens in our communities that are also being radicalized. So the lack of leadership and the lack of a strategy from this administration has fueled and allowed this really cancer to grow and metastasize. So what we must do is have a comprehensive strategy to destroy them and defeat them where they are militarily. In Iraq and Syria and Libya, we need to unleash American air power in a way that is going to actually destroy their capabilities, their leadership, their financing, their means of financing, their fielded forces. We got to go after them. But we also need to win the battle of ideas. We've got to get that narrative out there that we're going to win in the battle of ideas in the long run. I mean, this is a hateful ideology. We've got to get into that space in a much stronger way. Our efforts out of this administration have really been a joke. And we need to provide more support for the homegrown extremism, for us to be able to identify individuals that are likely to be radicalized and be able to intercept them before they take action into their own hands, as we saw happen just this weekend. It has to be a comprehensive strategy. But the top thing that we need is leadership and resolve, which we don't have right now.
So what Martha just described is exactly what our plan calls for and does. If you go to better.gop, you will see our 67-point plan that we have put in place in bold, specific black and white language on how we take this fight on and take this fight to the enemy. Martha just gave you a great description of what it is we're proposing to do. But at the end of the day, it does require leadership. Leadership we simply do not have from this president and this White House, and that is the leadership that we're proposing here in the House Republicans. You can't get a more articulate, more knowledgeable person in Congress on this subject than Martha McSally.
Well, thanks, Mr. Speaker. I'm the only female veteran in our 247 GOP conference, and it really is an honor to be able to serve on both the Armed Services Committee and the Homeland Security Committee, which is really the nexus of our plan and our strategy to be able to go after this threat.
So I know our time is up. I want to say thank you, but I want to thank Martha McSally. Thank you for taking on the issue of identifying the problem with women in the workforce that they're experiencing, for putting together a working group to explore those challenges and come up with solutions. And I want to thank you for all that you've done for our country, as a veteran, as a fighter pilot. I want to thank you for what you're doing here in Congress to make sure that we recognize these threats and we get ahead of them so that we can keep our country safe. Signing off, Paul Ryan, Martha McSally, thank you very much.